and welcome to Unveil Your Brilliance with Angilie Kapoor here on the Win Win Women TV network, where each week we explore helping you to break free from the illusions that are holding you back. My name is Angilie Kapoor. I am your host. I am also a conscious leadership coach, empowerment strategist, as well as a multi-book author, an inspirational speaker, as well as the founder of my leadership coaching company, Oversight Global, where we are on a mission to address the consciousness crisis in the world, one leader at a time. So here's a quote that I want to share with you. Hold yourself back or heal yourself back together. You decide. Now, this is a powerful quote from Brittany Burgunder, a life coach and author. Now, I want to share this with you because on today's episode, we have an amazing guest joining us to share her wisdom and insights on her unique perspective on transforming trauma into transformation. Now, before I bring her on, just a friendly reminder to keep a lookout for our episode segments, our show pillars, which we make sure we touch on each week. And again, they are brilliant mindset, breaking free, and brilliant strategies, which we'll touch on during our discussion. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and welcome our special guest for today, Nichole Myles, onto the show. Okay, now I am so thrilled to have our guest for today here with us. Now, before I bring her on, let me tell you a bit about her. So, Nichole Myles has over 20 years of experience in education, nonprofits, as well as leadership. Nichole is an expert in post-trauma growth, resilience, and trauma-informed approaches. Now, today she is here to share with us not only her own story, but also her unique perspective on transforming trauma into transformation, as well as providing valuable insights and accessible techniques for personal growth and healing. So get ready to be inspired, educated, and uplifted as we welcome to the show Nichole Myles. Nichole, welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much. So we actually had a very interesting conversation pre-show. So I definitely want to dive into some of that stuff. But can you just kind of just share with the ladies who were in the audience viewing this, just a little bit about your story and how you kind of came around to doing what you've been doing for the last few years?
Sure. And coming around is that is a great way to put it, like this wandering path, which I actually think is more typical for women than we realize.
Mm.
That we have all these little pieces in our lives, these little chapters, and then somewhere along the way they all kind of intersect.
Oh, beautiful.
And that's what happened to me. So long ago and far away, I was a teacher. I was an arts teacher and a response intervention teacher. And really had a most wonderful advocation, not really a vocation. But I was in a very abusive marriage.
Mm.
And as so many, again, of your listeners and watchers are, is, we end up in the wrong relationships. And I was so hung up on making sure that I had the things I thought I needed to have to
Mhm.
create this picture for myself, quite literally the house that, had a little white picket fence in the front, quite literally, dressing my girls in matching dresses and taking them to church. And so I didn't want to admit what was happening behind closed doors. I was this highly successful educator, very popular in my school and school district. I was moving things forward, and I had all these other things happening, heavily involved in my church.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to admit that things were going on. And as it turned out, I didn't come around really strongly to admitting it. Instead, I was intervened on. So the universe saw fit to intervene on me by sending two police officers to my home one night while I was 8 months pregnant
Mm.
with my third child, and saying, "We cannot make you leave, but we really think you need to go. We believe we have a credible threat on your life."
Wow.
And began to explain this very dramatic situation. And like so many other people in abusive intimate partner relationships, I had left and come back and left and come back and left and come back so many times. 7 is average. I'd gone 6 at that point. I decided that I was in fact going to leave. So we, packed duffel bags and disappeared. And I spent the next year plus, about 14 months, living in hiding. Was also homeless for a while. So I went from my perfect little home and dance lessons and matching dresses and birthday parties, to giving birth to a baby that in hiding couldn't have my name put on anything, losing that career because it just wasn't a thing that I could be doing. And suddenly I had to restart again. I was, 34 years old and had lost everything, the home, the career, the finances, all of it. It was just me and these three little children, and we had to start again. And I did. And I kind of muddled my way through and became a nonprofit executive. I found yet another advocation. So the universe smiled on me again. And I had this beautiful career for about 15 years. But all along, that story and those experiences were informing everything I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would share a little bit of it. And I would find that there was kind of this collective whisper of other people who had similar stories. And what I found was that there's this enormous community, this club none of us really want to be part of.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not talking about it.
Right.
We don't talk about it. We don't share about it. And so after quite a long time in my nonprofit career and getting us my little nonprofit through COVID, which I felt I was obligated to do, I decided that it was really time to start answering that call to figure out a way to do something with this story.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than telling people my sad and scary story, and they also would tell theirs, I really wanted a solution. And so I started studying within psychology. I started studying trauma and resilience. I became an integrated behavioral health practitioner, got a master's in IO psychology with a consulting and coaching concentration, and started studying post-traumatic growth.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is a way for us to take these experiences,
Right.
these things that have been difficult for us in traumas, and actually leverage them into ways to inform what we're going to do for the future.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many of us who have these traumas. And, I tell people trauma is a hard thing that isn't done being heard yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is. So people get very uncomfortable about that word, and they think in huge scale terms. And granted, the trauma I talked about, it was this pretty dramatic, could have had a movie camera running behind it kind of a thing.
Right.
But not all traumas are like that.
Right.
Many are quiet, many are small, or we think they're small, but that imprint in our head is really, it's a very hard thing for us that isn't done being heard yet.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do now is help people tap into that, tap into what they need to hear, and find, yes, the space to grieve it, yes, the space to acknowledge that loss, but also the space to grow from it and leverage it and use it as part of their story and transformation, because great strengths come out of that too.
Right. Right.
And that's
right.
how I ended up here. So that's what I'm doing now. Is I think everybody has this wisdom they need to unlock, and a lot of it comes from these really tough experiences.
Right, right. I mean, that you have such an amazing story of resilience. I mean, I do want to ask a couple of questions about, like you were saying, there's so many other women who have similar stories, but unfortunately, they don't have such a happy, flowery kind of, I don't want to say ending, but, version of a future journey. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, you were taking care of three little girls. I mean, you were pregnant at the time that all of this really kind of unfolded. So, what type of mindset do you think that you had to have, and that maybe women who find themselves in similar situations, what kind of advice would you give to them to get into that proper mindset and state to where you're not just, letting that situation happen to you, but really rising above it, and kind of ending up doing what you're doing?
Well, I want to honor a couple of things in that. First of all, thank you for saying that. But I definitely want to note that it was incredibly bumpy,
Mm-hmm.
incredibly ugly.
Right.
Um, incredibly isolating, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing now, is because I didn't have that guide.
Mm-hmm.
So I was stumbling all of the time, and I felt like I was making all of these mistakes, and this thing just kept coming up and kept coming up. And for me, I did have these children, and these children were fully reliant on me.
Right.
He lost his parental rights, and there wasn't anybody else. And so what I was really doing um, was muscling through.
Mm-hmm.
I was doubling down on tenacity I didn't know I had to try to be able to survive day to day.
Mm-hmm.
And the advice I would give to anybody is there are times when you are going to have to do that. But the reason we need to be talking, and the reason I want to lift women's voices up in this space, is that that was exceptionally bad for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was bad for my mental health, and it was bad for my physical health. We know this, that trauma affects our cells.
Mm-hmm.
I had major health issues that came along. Bacterial meningitis, which is a thing that almost nobody my age gets, that almost
Wow.
killed me.
Mm-hmm.
Pneumonia in the summer. You meet these people, if you're having these odd inflammation disorders, these chronic pain disorders, these things that people can't really put their fingers on what the genesis of them is. A lot of that is trauma and not addressing
Mm-hmm.
that trauma. So yeah, I was getting through the day, and I was muscling through all of this, and just, not going to give up, because I had these little people who were absolutely dependent on me doing it, but it was bad for me.
Right.
And
Right.
so my advice actually is to say, you're going to have to muscle through, but you also need and deserve and are worthy of saying what has happened, saying how you honestly feel
Mm-hmm.
about what is happening, and advocating for yourself. You are absolutely entitled to have that. I didn't address myself for more than a decade, really.
Right.
I was kind of lost. It was this whole new discovery of who I was. I'd lost it in the abusive relationship, and then I
Mm-hmm.
lost it kind of trying to recover from that. And it doesn't have to be like that.
Right.
And so I think if you're doing that right now in your life, if you are putting your head down and saying, I just have to survive through today, survival is okay. You are worth more than survival.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely deserve to be able to thrive. And in order to do that, you got to let some of this less fun, uglier stuff rise to the surface, and tell your story, and address what you actually need, because you do have that inner wisdom.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think, so many people are, they get enlightened by these stories of success of people who it kind of seems like they did it overnight, right? Like they
Yeah,
tell this story of I used to be this and now I'm this, but nobody really tells the middle part of the struggles that people went through to
sure.
get to that point. And so I think that, having the ladies hear that from you, it kind of makes it more relatable and makes it more, about the human experience that, yeah, I used to be here and now I'm here, but it wasn't easy. It was a struggle. There was so many things that happened in the middle. I mean, so yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
Of course, and that's really what I'm doing. We've got to talk about that stuff,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it is where it's at, and you should never, I still have to work on this stuff.
Exactly. Me too.
I have these degrees and certifications and expertise, and I'm still working on the stuff, and I have still failed at doing some of the stuff I need to have that I advise people to do I've still failed at that from time to time. So also grace for yourself,
Yeah,
that this is a process. There is not a destination.
exactly. You never really arrive, is what I like to say.
You're not going to arrive, but you should have the best, most beautiful journey you can possibly manage.
Exactly. Exactly.
I do want to talk about trauma because you've mentioned it a few times and how it's really kind of your basis of, transforming from trauma. And we all have gone through trauma, and we had a really great discussion about the different levels of trauma because I shared with you that, I went through that a time that was the most traumatic time of my life is when I got laid off from a healthcare management position. But when you share that, people don't consider it a trauma. I mean, I told you that I got turned away from, podcasts that like to talk about trauma and grief and stuff like that. And they didn't feel like my trauma qualified was big enough to be, addressed on their podcast. And so I know that we got into an interesting conversation about that, but I also want the ladies to hear it too, because not everybody goes through these huge, what is considered to be a huge, serious trauma. But I think that, like we were talking about, we all go through trauma at different levels. And it's really kind of how society has created like this hierarchy of trauma where people fall into and what they qualify to receive because of what they've been through. So let's get into a discussion about that. I think that's going to be
Absolutely. I
amazing.
love that you're doing that because I think this is so important. And it's one of the reasons why I don't tell like all the dramatic details of my trauma is because I used to say I don't want to do that because my greatest fear was that somebody would be sitting there and they would be measuring, there'd be a measure stick for them.
Exactly.
Is
Yeah.
my trauma the same as yours? Is it higher or lower? And that would be the determinant on how you act. So little neuroscience for everybody. And I'm not a neuroscientist, but I have studied this a lot. We are, essentially, we are the least resilient creatures on the planet, humans.
No, I believe
Um,
that.
we survived for one reason and one reason only, and it is because we understood trauma.
Mhm.
So congratulations, all of us survived because of the really hard things.
Mhm.
And it really works like this. You've got this little almond in the back of your head called the amygdala,
Mhm.
and we call that the prehistoric brain sometimes. And its job is to keep you alive. It's where your trauma response lives. It is waiting for you to run from a saber-toothed tiger. By the way, that part of your brain does not realize that it is 2024 and that the saber-toothed tiger may be an abusive spouse. It may be losing your job. It may be getting in a car accident.
Mhm.
It may be finding out you have a chronic health disorder. It has no idea. Brain is extremely smart and not very perceptive. So it has no idea.
Mhm.
So once you encounter whatever that hard thing is, amygdala does its job. It lights everything up. It releases all the hormones, the adrenaline, the cortisol, all of that stuff. It goes into high gear because it has one job, and that is to keep you alive.
Mm.
Trauma actually isn't a bad thing for humans in that respect because it's a survival instinct.
Right.
It wants to keep you alive. The way it does that is by shutting down all the stuff up here in your frontal lobe. That's your problem solving,
Mm.
that's your creativity, that's your language. And that's why when something that's really hard for you happens and somebody goes, so what do you need right now? I always say that is the most well-intentioned and least helpful thing ever, because if you're in that state, literally that part of your brain that would come up with, here are the things I need right now, it's shut off.
Mhm.
Amygdala has taken over. I call that brain inflame or brain hijack. It has taken over. And here's the deal. Whether it's an actual trauma, and the actual trauma is a thing that has affected your amygdala the way it feels it needs to survive. So losing your job, that's how you live. That's how you get, of course, that's going to be a legit trauma
Mhm.
because you are trying to survive and you need work to be able to survive. So it makes
Right.
perfect sense in my head. But whether it's the actual trauma, whether it's a trigger for the trauma,
Mhm.
and by the way, we also don't understand why somebody has a trauma, like why you losing a job might be a trauma for you, but not for another person. We don't have
Right.
any idea about that. We don't have any idea why some of us have trauma around even assaults or domestic violence and some don't. There's
Mhm.
no explanation for this. Brains are all unique.
True. True.
That happens. The trigger, who knows? Because it's how you're made up. It's what you remember. So that could be a thing you smell, a thing you touch, a thing you see. We have no
Mhm.
idea.
Mhm.
or talking about that, or hearing somebody else's story about it, which can also set you off, or working with somebody
Yeah.
who's having that experience. That's called vicarious trauma. So you have traumas, triggers, and vicarious trauma. And when you look at brain scans, your little neuroscience of all these pieces, inside the brain, all three of those things look nearly identical
Mm,
because brain is smart, but not very perceptive. It knows one thing and one thing only: you need to survive, and whatever you are encountering right now is a threat to that.
right.
So that's what it is doing for you. So this idea that you can measure by society standards what is or isn't a trauma is utter garbage,
Right,
actually. I mean, I hate to say it as that, frankly, but it is just utter garbage. It isn't necessarily those huge moments even that really affect us
Mm-hmm.
as deeply as those small, your body, your brain is saying, survive, 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 survive. There may never be a huge moment, and yet you are living in that constant state
Right.
of trauma. That's legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
That's legitimate. You can't be wrong about what's going on in your head.
Exactly. Exactly.
You can't be wrong about what's going on in your head. And so knowing that you should never diminish that, and that there are ways to address it. And are there more profound traumas than others, traumas that take longer to recover from or longer to unpack? Of course there are.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that is also individual.
Right.
And you aren't stronger or weaker because humans are unique.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the measuring stick for how you are doing with what is happening to you is in you, not
Mm-hmm.
outside of you. It cannot be outside of you.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are telling you that do not have the brain scan to know, frankly, right? they just don't have that.
Yeah.
You need to know that those experiences, I used to call them small T's or large T traumas. Those are
Mm-hmm.
all legitimate. They're all worth addressing. They're all worth finding the way to transform. But they can never be not enough. If they're
Right.
affecting you on a day-to-day basis, if they're affecting you repeatedly, which is what trauma does, it keeps talking to you
Mm-hmm.
until it's had its turn. It's going to keep talking to you until it's had its turn. That can be 5 months, 5 years, or 50 years.
True.
If that's happening to you, then that's the thing that you can address, and you should not be embarrassed about what that is.
Yeah, I mean, again, I wanted to have this discussion because I think that a lot of women out there might be thinking, oh, I only suffer from small trauma, so it's not that big a deal. I'm not worth the attention that the bigger traumas are getting. But like you're saying, we all experience trauma. We all process it the same, and to really allow yourself to go through that process and learn what it is that trauma is trying to teach you. The other thing that I wanted to be sure that we talk about is you have this amazing perspective on resilience. Now, with, on especially on this show, but I mean, I think in regards to just having discussions with women, we talk about resilience a lot. And I know that especially in connection with trauma and transformation, you have kind of found it to be kind of an excuse for people to not be as supportive. So let's talk about that.
Resilience is important. It is essential. It is, first of all, a skill set and not a trait. So you
Mm,
are not born resilient or not resilient. Resilient is about something that happens to you that causes you to need to develop the skill. So what I tell people about resilience is this: resilience is the start of your journey to solving your problem. And I ask people to kind of imagine for me that we've all gotten on a boat. We're out on the water, and we're on our boat, and you fall off the boat. Now, perhaps you've had swimming lessons.
mhm.
Perhaps you have a life jacket. Perhaps you don't. But no matter what, you are not a fish. So as soon as you hit the water, your body, your brain, your very smart trauma brain is going to go, this is not right. And you are going to fight to get to the surface.
Right.
That act is resilience.
Mm,
Okay. It's essential. You're not going to survive unless you have the act of resilience, because you've got to get to the surface. You don't have gills,
mhm,
right? But you don't have gills. You're not a fish. You are in the water now, not on the boat.
mhm.
The boat keeps going.
Right.
In life, this is what we do to people. We tell them they're resilient because they've fallen off the boat and they're treading water and the boat has kept going.
Mhm,
And then people start to feel like they are failures, like they are struggling too much, like they are stuck, because they are. They're in the water.
mhm, mhm, literally.
Exactly. The step that we have to do is beyond resilience. We have to get folks out of the water.
Right.
Whether that's swimming to shore, getting back on the boat, we have to get folks back out of the water. They don't belong in that water.
Mhm,
And time passes and things change. And so if you've had to be resilient, if you had to work harder because you have a chronic health issue,
right.
when you are stuck in that repeatedly, if you're constantly feeling like you're having to be resilient, one, that's probably true. Two, you need to evaluate how you're going to get out of the water. It isn't about you having to be repeatedly resilient over and over again. It is about you knowing that you are worthy and you deserve to get out of the water. And whether that's get on the shore, get back in that boat, or get on a different one, you deserve to get out of the water.
Mm,
And that's what I really think about resilience. It's a life-saving method. It's a emergency response. This is your emergency response team coming to your rescue when you have to dig into your resilience.
mhm,
It's not a way to live,
right.
not a way to live.
I hate that we are out of time because we're having such an amazing conversation, but can you just kind of give the ladies like your final thoughts on, trauma, turning trauma into transformation and resilience and all the stuff that we talked about, how they can really use the information that we've shared with them today to unveil their brilliance?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think I love that one of the reasons I was drawn to the show is that I love the title. This is Unveiling Your Brilliance. I see this as tapping into your inner wisdom. So
Mhm.
ladies, you have this knowledge already. The specific things that I did may not be the specific things you need to do, but you know what those are. If you look deep inside yourself, you know what those are. So I want you to know that you really, really can trust yourself enough to identify what that hard thing is that's trying to talk to you,
Mhm.
how you've gotten stuck in that cycle. And we don't shame ourselves for that. We do a little Maya Angelou moment and say, when we know better, we do better. So we don't shame ourselves for that. And we address what we need. It's not what society has told us. It's not even maybe what our partners or families have told us. It's what we need to do to move ourselves forward, because you are absolutely worth it. You don't need to be scared of trauma. Actually, inside of it, it's kind of hiding these real superpowers that have kept you surviving, and it's part of what has made you brilliant. So be not afraid, tap right into that. And if you have questions, you can always find me online. You can find me on social media, and I will answer those questions for you.
Well, thank you again so much, Nicole, for this amazing conversation, for all of the, nuggets of wisdom that you have given the ladies. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure to be here, Angilie. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Unveiling Your Brilliance. I think this is a great, great program.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and that is it for today's episode on transforming trauma into transformation with our special guest, post-trauma growth, resilience, and trauma-informed approaches expert, Nichole Myles. Now, I want to thank Nicole again for joining us today and for sharing her incredible story, wisdom, and powerful perspectives with us. And also thank you, beautiful lady, for being here with us today as well. Now, if you're here with me live, be sure to join me in the second half of the show for Brilliant Connections, where I get to meet you and get to know you, and you're able to ask me any questions that you might have from today's episode topic or the show. If you're catching this on replay, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you'll check out our previous episodes as well on www.winwinwomen.tv/show/unveil-your-brilliance, as well as join me live next week. Remember, like life coach and author Brittany Burgunder said, you can hold yourself back or you can heal yourself back together. You decide. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next week. My lady's here with me live. I'll see you in a few seconds.